My name is Mary, and today I want to share something I've kept locked inside my heart for a long, long time. It's not easy, but maybe, just maybe, someone out there who's been through something similar will feel a little less alone. If you're listening, I'd love to know where you're from. It means the world to me to feel like my voice is reaching you, wherever you are. I grew up in a tiny rural town in southern Missouri, in a small wooden house with creaky floorboards and windows that let the breeze through. My mom kept everything spotless, even though we didn't have much. My dad worked sunup to sundown, hauling hay and fixing fences. Mom sewed dresses for the ladies at church to make a few extra dollars. Money was always tight, but we had something even stronger: faith and love. In our family, church wasn't just important, it was the heart of our lives. Every Sunday morning, before the sun even peeked over the hills, Mama would wake me up with a gentle shake and a kiss on the forehead. She'd say, "We gotta thank the Lord, baby, even if all we have is a bowl of beans and a roof that doesn't leak." And I loved it, loved every part of it. I loved the sound of the old hymns echoing through the sanctuary, the way people hugged each other with real warmth, and the sweet scent of lilies we'd bring from our garden to place near the pulpit. Our church wasn't fancy, just a weathered old building with rickety pews and a tin roof, but to me, it was a palace. Right in the center stood the pulpit where Pastor James preached. As a little girl, I used to sit wide-eyed, believing he had a direct line to God. He was calm and steady, with silver hair, a neat beard, and a voice that made the whole room go quiet. Folks said he was a blessing to our community, a true man of God. Mama used to tell her friends that he was sent from heaven, and I, at 10 years old, believed it with all my heart. After every service, Pastor James would stand by the door, shaking hands, smiling kindly, calling everyone by name. Mama would whisper to me that he was the kind of man I should look up to. And I did. Back then, my days were filled with school, games with my best friend Lisa in the schoolyard, and helping out at church. I loved Mrs. Morgan, my teacher, always said I was smart and read beautifully. After school, Lisa and I would play tag and hide and seek until we were breathless with the laughter. Sometimes I'd wander out to the backyard and gather ripe peaches that had fallen from our tree, sticky juice running down my chin, feeling like the luckiest girl in the world. But Sundays were always my favorite. I'd wear the dress Mama stitched just for me, tie my hair with a ribbon, and walk hand in hand with her to church, humming hymns. Mama taught me to be kind, to listen, and to always help out when I could, especially at church. One Sunday, she told me it was time I helped more. She said I could start by straightening the chairs and bringing flowers to decorate the altar. I felt proud, like I was doing something truly meaningful. I'd pick wild daisies and tiny roses from the field nearby and place them in an old jar by the pulpit. It may have been simple, but to me, it was sacred. I felt seen, like maybe God noticed me too. One Sunday, as I was arranging the flowers, Pastor James walked by with his Bible in hand and paused. He smiled the way he always did and said something in that gentle tone of his. I told Mama about it when we got home, and she beamed. She said I was growing into a fine young lady and that serving in the church was a blessing for our whole family. Daddy, sitting on the porch with his coffee, said I was a good girl and that the Lord would always watch over me. So I kept going to every service, sometimes even on Wednesdays for prayer meetings. Mama said it was good for my soul, and I believed her. I knew all the hymns by heart and sang them from deep in my chest. Pastor James would always greet me, ask how I was doing in school, and if I was being respectful to my parents. I'd nod and tell him how I helped Mama, how I was doing well in reading. He'd smile and say I was special, that I had a bright future ahead, and I believed every word. I had no reason not to. In our little town, people trusted each other. We left our doors unlocked and waved to every passing car. I didn't know yet that sometimes, even in the house of God, shadows can linger where you least expect them. He was more than just a pastor to our small town. He was a father figure, the kind of man people greeted with a warm handshake and eyes full of reverence. Folks said he was a true man of God, and my mama believed that with all her heart. I did too. At 10 years old, I thought being a man of God meant someone who could never, ever do wrong. I had no reason to think otherwise. I was just a little girl, full of Sunday school verses, hope, and innocent faith, without the faintest idea that sometimes the world could hold shadows far darker than I imagined. But I'd learned that soon enough. What I'm about to share changed everything, and though it's heavy, I promised myself I'd speak the truth. Maybe my story can be a light for someone else out there. Everything started to shift the day Pastor James told me I'd done a beautiful job arranging the flowers up at the altar. Everything started to shift the day Pastor James told me I'd done a beautiful job arranging the flowers up at the altar. After that, I started noticing how often he'd call me over, not just on Sundays or Wednesday night services, but on quiet afternoons when the church was mostly empty. Those hushed hours, which once felt sacred, now make my skin crawl just thinking about them. Mama thought it was wonderful. She'd beam when she told the neighbors I was spending time at the church, guided by a good man who loved the Lord. She'd say, Pastor James always had kind words about me, and said I had a gift for helping. My daddy, who came home each night tired from landscaping jobs, would nod and say it was nice to see me on the right path. And I believed it. I felt proud, like I was doing something meaningful, not just for my family, but for God. Looking back now, I know they didn't see what was really happening. None of us did. Pastor James had a calmness to him, a quiet, soothing way of speaking that made people feel safe. He'd walk toward me with his Bible tucked under one arm and smile like everything in the world was right. He'd tell me I was special, that God had given me a pure heart. I believed every word. My cheeks flushed with joy. Sometimes after service, he'd ask me to stay behind to chat. Said he wanted to know how school was going, if I was being good at home, what kind of games I liked to play. And I told him everything, thinking it meant he cared. But now, I see those talks for what they were. He was learning how to get close, figuring out the right way to gain my trust. One afternoon, Mama sent me over with a cornbread she'd baked for him. I wrapped it in a kitchen towel and skipped across the lawn behind the church, knocked on the office door in the back. He answered with a grin, said the place always felt brighter when I was around, and called me a blessing. My chest swelled with the pride. I thanked him, shy but happy. He invited me in, sat down, and started talking about everything. School, my parents, even what toys I liked. It felt nice, like chatting with an uncle. But that warmth I remember was just a disguise. I see that now. There were moments I couldn't explain even then, like a strange flutter in my chest, a tightening that didn't feel quite right. One time while I was tidying the hymnals, I caught him watching me. He didn't say anything at first, just looked. Then he walked over and said I was growing into a pretty young lady, and that soon enough, boys would start to notice me. I didn't know how to respond. I just looked down, pretending to focus on the books. He chuckled, low and soft, and said God liked shy girls. That evening, I told Mama what he'd said, expecting her to laugh it off, and she did. She said he was just teasing, that I was still a child. I wanted to believe her, and so I tucked away the discomfort, convinced myself it didn't mean anything. Pastor James began giving me more to do. He asked me to stand near the pulpit while he preached, to carry his Bible up front, to help set up for prayer meetings. I poured my heart into those tasks, believing I was serving the Lord. Mama would glow with pride, telling her friends how Pastor James called me his dedicated little helper. Daddy would smile, say I was a blessing to the church. I felt seen, valued, like I belonged, but now I understand he was drawing me in little by little until I didn't question being so close to him. Then came the day I felt that knot in my stomach stronger than ever. I was cleaning the pews when he came up behind me. He placed his hand gently on my shoulder and told me I wasn't like the other kids, that God had a special plan for me. I whispered thank you, but inside something felt off, wrong in a way I couldn't name. His hand lingered just a second too long. He stared, not saying anything. And then, just like that, he let go and told me to carry on, said God was watching me. I left the church that day with my heart racing, not sure what to make of that feeling. Later at home, Mama asked how my day went. I told her the pastor said I was chosen by God. She lit up, said it was such a blessing, but I kept the rest to myself, the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Mama always told me to trust the pastor, that he was a man of God. So I did. I buried that uneasy feeling and held on to her words instead. That night, I remember lying in bed that night, trying to pray, hoping God would somehow whisper that everything was okay. But sleep came before any answer. Looking back now, I realized that moment was the first step down a path I didn't even know I was walking, a quiet descent into something I couldn't name at the time. Outside of church, life was still familiar. I walked to school each morning with my best friend, Lisa. We'd stop by the corner diner on Fridays for milkshakes, laugh in the park after homework, and help our moms with the laundry or grocery runs. But the church, it was slowly taking up more of my world. And Pastor James, he was always around, calling out to me with compliments, watching me with a gaze I didn't yet have the words to understand. I kept showing up, happy to help arrange the pews or set out hymnals. But there was this strange nervous flutter in my stomach that never seemed to go away. I didn't know it then, but something inside me was already sensing the wrongness. With each passing week, Pastor James became more present in my life. I was at church nearly every day, polishing brass fixtures, dusting the altar, even folding bulletins when no one else wanted to. My mother was proud. She'd smile every time I came home with stained fingers and said I'd done the Lord's work. I thought I was making God happy, but that uneasy feeling, that cold, creeping tension in my chest, it only grew stronger. And now I understand it for what it truly was, a warning. One afternoon after school, my mom asked me to drop off a lace cloth she had embroidered for the altar. I wrapped it up carefully and walked it over to the church. tapping on the door of the little room behind the sanctuary. Pastor James opened the door, smiling the way he always did, and said, "You're turning into such a beautiful young lady." He mentioned how shiny my hair looked, how I reminded him of a blooming flower. I smiled, flustered, cheeks burning, and muttered a thank you. But something in his tone made my skin crawl. He took the cloth and asked if I'd come in for a minute, said that he wanted to talk. I stepped inside but stayed close to the door. My chest felt tight, like my ribs were closing in. He sat down, his voice calm and warm, and told me how special I was, that God had chosen me to be a role model for the other kids, that I should trust him because he knew what was best for me. I nodded, thinking he was just giving one of his usual talks, but now I see he was pulling me in, weaving a net with kind words and spiritual authority, wrapping it around me so I wouldn't question his intentions. Before I left, he gently stroked my hair and said I was growing up so fast that I'd soon be a real woman. I walked home with my heart pounding and a strange chill that wouldn't leave. When I got back, Mom asked how it went. I told her Pastor James said I was special, and she lit up, saying how blessed I was to hear that. But I didn't mention the way he spoke or how his hand had lingered on my hair. I was afraid she'd laugh it off or tell me I was imagining things. That night, I lay awake, tossing in bed, trying to pray again, asking if I should be worried. But peace didn't come. Now I know that gnawing discomfort was something sacred, my spirit trying to protect me. But I was just a kid. I didn't have the language, the understanding, to recognize what was unfolding. The next day at recess, Lisa and I were running around the schoolyard, laughing and breathless. For a moment, the heaviness in my chest disappeared. But later, when we sat under the oak trees to catch our breath, I told her what Pastor James had said, that I was getting prettier, that I'd be a woman soon. Her smile vanished. She looked at me with wide, worried eyes and said that was a weird thing for a pastor to say, that it didn't sound right. She warned me gently that not all grown-ups were as good as they seemed. I laughed it off, told her she was overreacting. Pastor James was a man of God. Everyone respected him, but her words stayed with me. On the walk home, they echoed louder than the sound of my footsteps. And for the first time, I let myself wonder, what if Lisa was right? What if there was something about him, something I needed to see? I didn't want to believe what I was starting to feel. Not with the way my mom always said he was a godly man. Not with how my dad would call him a pillar of the community. Pastor James had everyone's respect, but something about the way he looked at me, the things he said that didn't quite make sense, had begun to stir something in me, something uncomfortable. That afternoon, I got home and found my mom at her sewing machine, working on a new dress for the church picnic. She asked if I was excited about it. I nodded and said yes, but my voice was so quiet, I don't think she noticed how distracted I was. That Sunday, Pastor James gave a sermon about obedience, how children should always listen to their elders because God speaks through them. I was sitting up front, where he always asked me to sit, and I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. After the service, he asked if I could stay behind and help tidy up the altar before the next meeting. I said yes, but I was quieter than usual, and something in me felt tight, heavy. He must have sensed it, because he asked if I was okay. I told him I was just tired, but I know now he was checking to see how much I still trusted him. As I arranged the flowers, he watched me again, then told me how lovely I looked in the dress my mom had made. He said I looked like a princess in the Lord's kingdom. I thanked him, but my face flushed and I felt that sick twist in my stomach all over again. Then he stepped closer, rested his hand on my shoulder, and said I had to keep our conversations private, that what we talked about was just between me, him, and God. I nodded, not really understanding, but everything in me screamed that something wasn't right. I walked home fast, my heart racing, and didn't tell my mom a word about what he said. That night at dinner, my dad asked how the sermon was. I said it was about obedience, and he told me to always listen to Pastor James because he knew what was best. Mom chimed in, saying how lucky I was to have such a man of God watching over me. I forced a smile, but inside, I was tangled in worry. Lisa's voice kept echoing in my head, her warning that sometimes adults aren't as good as they seem. That hand on my shoulder, that secret he asked me to keep, it all made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't explain. Looking back, I know those were the first signs, but at the time I was just a 10-year-old girl. I didn't have the tools to understand what was unfolding. The days kept rolling on, and that unease I felt around Pastor James grew heavier with each visit. Lisa's warning never left me, even though I kept brushing it off, thinking she was just being dramatic. My mom kept sending me to church almost every day, and I kept going because I didn't want to disobey. I was just a kid, and I had no idea how deeply this would mark my life. One afternoon, Mom asked me to take a notebook she had made for the pastor to use during Bible study. I held it tight as I walked to the church, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I got there, the building was empty, except for Pastor James, sitting alone in the little room behind the sanctuary. I knocked, and he opened the door with that same warm smile he always wore, but it didn't feel warm anymore. It made my stomach churn. He thanked me for the notebook and asked if I'd come in, said he wanted to show me something about faith. I stepped inside, but stayed near the doorway, heart pounding. He told me to sit down, so I did, not wanting to cause a fuss. Then he started talking about how good it was that I always obeyed, how pleased God must be with me. He said I needed to trust him, that God had put him in my life as a guide. I nodded, not saying a word, just feeling that pressure in my chest build. He stood up, walked over, and gently ran his fingers through my hair, like he had done before. But this time, his hand kept moving down to my shoulder, where he gave a light squeeze. He told me I was a blessing, that God had chosen me to be special to him. I froze. I didn't know what to say or how to move. My body just locked up. Now I know what he was doing, using faith as a chain. But back then, I didn't see it. He kept his voice calm and soft, saying I could never tell anyone what we talked about, that it was our secret with God, that if I spoke up, I'd lose my blessings and make God sad. My eyes welled up, but I didn't cry. I was too scared of what would happen if I disobeyed. He crouched down to meet my eye level, brushed his hand gently across my cheek, and told me I was pure, that he would lead me in the right direction. My stomach turned, but I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Then he told me to get up and follow him to the altar. I walked in on shaky legs, the scent of candle wax still clinging to my clothes from earlier that afternoon when I lit them myself. My palms were sweaty, my knees wobbled. Pastor James stood near the altar and told me to kneel. I did, trying to focus, to pray like he asked. But the moment I closed my eyes, I could feel how close he was standing. I couldn't concentrate. Something felt off. He took my hand and gripped it tightly, whispering that God was watching over us. I remember how his touch traveled slowly up my arm. My whole body started to shake. He said I was an angel, that he would protect me, but only if I did exactly as he said. I wanted to move. I wanted to get up and run, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. He put his hand on my shoulder, let it trail down my arm, and then pulled me closer by the waist. His voice got softer, almost like a breath against my ear. He told me that what was happening was sacred, that God understood it, and that I had nothing to be afraid of. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. And then, without warning, the tears started falling. He cupped my face in both hands and said I belonged to him now, that God had given me to him. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I knew deep down that this wasn't right, that this couldn't possibly be what God wanted. When he finally let go of me, I was shaking from head to toe. He straightened his clothes, smiled like nothing had happened, and told me not to say a word to anyone, that God punished those who disobeyed. I got up as fast as I could and bolted out of there, not daring to look back. When I got home, my mom was in the kitchen and asked if everything was all right. I lied and said I was just tired, then ran to my room and threw myself on the bed. I cried quietly, trying to keep the sobs from slipping out loud enough for her to hear. Looking back now, I know that day marked the end of my childhood. It ended right there at that altar, with no one there to save me. That night, I couldn't eat. My dad asked if I was sick, and my mom just said I was probably worn out from helping at the church. I nodded and asked if I could go to bed early. I lay in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, feeling hollow in a way I'd never felt before. I tried to pray, begged God to help me, but it felt like he wasn't listening. The smell of the wax and the memory of Pastor James's hands wouldn't leave me. I didn't know what to do with the weight of it all. Now I understand that day was the beginning of a pain that would follow me for years. The next morning, I didn't even want to walk past the church. I went to school, but I barely said a word. Lisa noticed right away. She asked what was wrong, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her. I just said I had a headache. She pulled me into a hug and said if I ever needed to talk, she'd be there. And I wanted to tell her I really did. But the fear of defying Pastor James, of making God angry, was too strong. The whole day I felt like something had been ripped out of me. The worst part, I knew I'd have to go back. My mom wouldn't understand if I suddenly stopped volunteering. That moment in the church had changed me, though. I wasn't the same girl. His hands, his voice, the smell of melted wax clinging to me. I carried all of it like a burden I didn't know how to set down. I was only 10, but in that moment, I lost something I didn't yet have the words to name. The silence I kept became the beginning of years of quiet suffering, and I started avoiding the church like it was cursed. When my mom told me to go, I came up with excuses, headaches, school projects, too tired from classes. She'd give me that look, frustrated, and remind me how important it was to serve God. I'd nod, heart pounding, but inside I was breaking. I didn't tell a soul what had happened. Why would I? Pastor James had said it was a sacred secret, that if I broke it, God would punish me. And I, naive as I was, believed him. At school, I was different. Lisa saw it in my face. I didn't laugh the way I used to. Even when we went to the park, I'd sit quietly, staring at the ground, trapped in my own thoughts. One day, she pulled me aside and asked what was really going on. I told her I was just tired. She didn't buy it. She looked right into my eyes and said I seemed sad, and that if someone had hurt me, she'd help. I wanted to tell her the truth, I swear I did. But the fear of going against the man who spoke in God's name kept me silent. I just nodded and told her not to worry, but I could feel the lump in my throat getting tighter. At home, my mom started noticing things. She kept asking why I didn't want to go to church anymore. She said Pastor James had asked about me and said he was worried. She reminded me that I had a responsibility to the Lord, that helping at church was a blessing. My dad would chime in too, saying Pastor James was a good man, someone I could learn from. I listened in silence, my hands clammy, my chest burning with things I couldn't say. I wanted to scream that he wasn't who they thought he was, that he'd hurt me, but his words kept echoing in my mind. Don't tell anyone, or God will punish you. So I swallowed my tears and said I'd go back. One morning, without warning, my mom told me that Pastor James was coming over to talk. She said he was concerned about how I disappeared. My stomach flipped so fast I nearly dropped my plate. I tried to think of an excuse, any excuse, but she told me firmly that I stay home and listen to what he had to say. When he showed up, all smiles with a Bible tucked under his arm, I wanted to disappear. Mom greeted him like a guest of honor, poured him a cup of coffee, and had me sit beside him on the couch. He looked at me and asked why I hadn't been around. With that calm tone that used to seem kind, he said, God missed me at church. I kept my eyes down, unable to speak. Then, leaning close so my mother wouldn't hear, he whispered that I had to come back, that our secret was sacred to the Lord. He brushed his hand across my knee under the table just for a second, then smiled like nothing had happened. My body froze. A chill climbed up my spine, and I felt lightheaded. Mom looked at me concerned and asked if I was okay. I told her I felt a little cold. He chuckled and said I was just sensitive, that God loved that about me. When he left, my mother said I was lucky to have a pastor so caring and devoted, and that was that. The following Sunday, she made me go back. I was trembling, but she held my hand and said I'd feel better once I was inside. As soon as I walked through the doors and saw him, smiling like always, I felt sick. He called me his dedicated girl in front of everyone, and my mom beamed with pride. I went to arrange the flowers by the altar, but my hands were shaking so badly, I almost knocked the vase over. He came up behind me and whispered that I'd done the right thing coming back, that God was pleased with me. He placed his hand on my shoulder, squeezing just enough for me to feel the threat behind the gesture. I wanted to scream. That night, I cried into my pillow, afraid my mom would hear. The weight of what I was carrying felt unbearable. I tried to pray, beg God to help me, but it felt like he was far away. The memory of his hand, his voice, that twisted message he fed me, it clung to me like something I couldn't wash off. Now I understand the silence I kept was a kind of prison, but back then I thought it was what God expected of me. My mom kept praising me for going back, and my dad said I was being strong. I forced a smile, but inside I was crumbling. At school, Lisa kept asking what was wrong. One afternoon, she found me crying near the swings by the park. She hugged me and told me I could trust her. I wanted so badly to tell her everything, but fear gripped my throat. I told her things were rough at home. She promised to help if I ever needed it, but I knew I wouldn't say a word because he had convinced me it was all my fault, that if I spoke, God would be angry. And so I kept quiet, and the silence grew heavier by the day. Going back to church felt like walking into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I wasn't the same girl anymore. I couldn't laugh like I used to, couldn't sing the hymns with joy, couldn't look people in the eye. That part of me, the bright, carefree girl, was fading. The pastor's touch, his words, the secret he forced me to carry, it poisoned everything inside me. I was 10 years old, but I didn't feel like a child anymore. He didn't stop. Every time I stepped into that church, he found a way to pull me aside, said he needed help in the storage room or back by the altar. He'd tell me I was special, that God was proud of me for keeping our secret. Each time he got close, my body would stiffen. He'd rest his hand on my shoulder or stroke my hair, sometimes trailing down my arm. He'd whisper that I was a blessing, that God loved me for obeying. I couldn't move, I couldn't say no, because the fear of punishment from God was greater than anything else. Now I know he used my faith to control me, but back then I believed I was the one to blame, that it was my burden to carry. My mother kept sending me to church, never suspecting a thing. She'd say I seemed quieter, more withdrawn, but chalked it up to growing pains. Said helping at church would bring me peace. That Pastor James was a man of God, guiding me the right way. I'd sit there quiet, the lump in my throat growing tighter each time. And still, I'd go. I didn't know how to say no back then, not to the grown-ups, not to the ones who said they spoke for God. Every time I walked into that church, Pastor James would greet me with that smile of his, the one that used to seem kind, but now made my skin crawl. His sermons always circled back to obedience, about how God punished those who didn't listen to their elders. I knew he was talking to me. I could feel it, like a warning cloaked in scripture, reminding me to keep our secret. At night, I'd lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and feeling a hollow ache I couldn't explain. Sometimes I'd dream, dreams that left me breathless and in tears. The waxy scent of candles, the pressure of his hands, the whisper of his voice. I'd wake up shaking, heart pounding, trying to pray, begging God to pull me out of it. But heaven felt so far away. I felt broken, dirty, like something deep inside me had cracked open. I didn't know it then, but that was trauma taking root. Back then, I thought it was punishment. I thought God was mad at me for something I didn't understand. Keeping up appearances at school became harder. Lisa noticed the change before anyone else. She saw that I didn't laugh the same. I didn't play like I used to. One day, we were sitting at the park, and she found me alone on a bench, staring into space. She sat next to me and asked again what was wrong. She said I looked like a scared little bird, and it wasn't normal for me to be that quiet. My eyes filled with tears, but I swallowed them down. I wanted to tell her everything, but fear held me hostage. Fear of the pastor, of not being believed, of God turning his back on me. So all I said was, I miss feeling happy. She didn't say a word, just wrapped her arms around me. That hug was the only warmth I felt that day. Back home, my mom started growing more concerned. She said I looked pale, wasn't eating right, that I seemed sick. My dad even asked if someone had hurt me, but I shook my head, too scared to say the truth. One night, she found me crying in my room. She sat beside me and asked what was going on. I told her I missed my friends, that school was tiring, anything to keep her from digging deeper. She hugged me and said I needed to pray more, that God would bring me peace. But prayer didn't bring peace. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, felt his touch. The fear came rushing back all over again, and it never stopped. Pastor James kept finding ways to pull me close. He'd ask me to help with the little things, straightening hymnals, dusting the altar. just small tasks, but it was still a way to get near me. One day, when I was alone in the back room, he locked the door and said he wanted to teach me more about obedience. He slid his hand around my waist and pulled me in, whispering that I belonged to him, that God had given me to him. I begged him quietly through tears to stop, but he told me I had no choice, that God was watching. When he finally let go, I ran home like I was dragging a sack of concrete on my back. My body felt heavy, like I was made of stone. I could feel my childhood slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to hold on to it. I stopped singing at church. I didn't laugh with Lisa anymore. Didn't want to run, to play, to be. Everything felt mechanical, like I was just going through the motions, like a doll pretending to be alive. My mom still praised me for helping at church. She said Pastor James was proud of me, but I didn't feel proud. I felt terrified. I felt ashamed. I felt hollow. I know now that was the trauma growing inside me, carving its place. But back then, all I wanted was to disappear, to find a way out of the nightmare that never ended. The years passed, and the weight of that secret only grew heavier. Pastor James kept hurting me over and over until he was finally transferred to another town almost 2 years later. By then, I was 12. The bruises he left weren't on my skin. They were buried deeper. I was no longer that joyful girl who used to sing hymns with a full heart, who laughed in the park without worry. I had become a quiet, frightened teenager, hiding everything I felt behind a wall of silence. When I turned 15, something inside me finally shifted. I can't explain exactly what changed, only that I woke up one day and couldn't keep the silence anymore, not even if breaking it hurt worse than anything else had. I still saw Lisa at school. She never gave up on me, even though I'd grown quiet and withdrawn. One afternoon, as we walked home along a cracked sidewalk in our neighborhood, I was more silent than usual. She stopped, turned to me, and said she was tired of watching me suffer. She told me she knew something was wrong, and that I didn't have to carry it all by myself, that she was here no matter what. Those words hit me like a jolt to the chest. I felt my eyes fill before I could stop it, and then the tears just came. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her everything, how Pastor James used to call me into that little room behind the sanctuary, how he'd touch me and whisper that it was God's will, that our secret was holy. I told her about the fear, the way he'd twist my faith and make me feel like it was all my fault, like I was the one who was dirty. Lisa didn't flinch. She just listened, her eyes brimming with tears, and then she pulled me into the tightest hug. She said it wasn't my fault, that what he'd done was evil, that God had nothing to do with it. She told me I needed to tell someone who could actually help, because keeping it inside was tearing me apart. I was trembling from head to toe, but for the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of relief, like I could finally breathe. She convinced me to talk to my mom, told me she'd understand, that she'd protect me, that I didn't have to go through this alone anymore. I was terrified. My mother had always spoken of Pastor James with reverence, calling him a holy man, someone anointed by God. But deep down, I knew Lisa was right. I had to speak up. That night, after my dad left to meet his buddies at the VFW, I asked Mom to sit with me in the kitchen. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. My palms were slick with sweat, and I could barely hold my mug of tea. I started slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. I told her I had something important to say. She looked concerned and asked what was wrong. I took a deep breath and let it all spill out. The touches, the threats, the way he'd used God to silence me. I told her how it was killing me inside, how I couldn't carry the burden anymore. By the time I'd finished, I was sobbing so hard I could hardly see. But what she did next shattered me in ways I never imagined. She just stared at me, her face frozen, her eyes wide. Then she stood up, crossed her arms, and said I was making it up, that Pastor James was a man of God, that he would never do something like that. She told me I was tarnishing the reputation of a holy man, and that God would punish me for such lies. She said maybe I was confused, maybe I'd misunderstood. Kids, she said, sometimes imagine things. I tried to tell her again that it was true, but she raised her voice and told me to stop saying such horrible things. I cried even harder, feeling a kind of emptiness I can't describe. My own mother, the person I trusted more than anyone, didn't believe me. She said I was just trying to get out of my church responsibilities, trying to avoid the work I used to be proud of. She told me she'd pray for me, that God would forgive me for saying such awful things. Then she told me to go upstairs and that she didn't want to hear another bad word about it. I went up to my room, collapsed on my bed, and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. I know now she was blinded by her faith in him. But that night, all I knew was that I was completely alone. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to go to school. I stayed curled up in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the world had slipped away from me. That afternoon, Lisa came by. She looked worried. She asked what happened. I told her my mom didn't believe me, said I was lying. Lisa hugged me again, told me we'd figure something out, that I couldn't give up now. But I was so broken, I didn't know where to begin. After that, my mom started looking at me differently. Her eyes held something cold, like I was no longer her daughter, just someone she didn't know anymore. My father never knew a thing. I didn't have it in me to tell him. I was too afraid he'd say the same things my mother did. That day carved something deep into me. The courage I'd fought so hard to find turned into a wound I hadn't expected, and her disbelief made the guilt that was already eating at me even worse. I felt dirty, like I was the one to blame. Now I understand she couldn't face the truth, that her blind faith in the pastor kept her from protecting me. But back then, all I knew was that I lost the only person I thought might save me. The silence I'd hoped would get lighter only grew heavier, and I knew I'd be carrying that weight alone for a long time. After my mother called me a liar, and they left me alone with the truth, I lived the next few years, dragging that pain behind me like a cross. Pastor James was long gone, moved to some other town, but what he did to me was burned into my soul. I went from 15 to 20, trying to act like everything was fine, but inside I was broken. Then, at 25, something inside me said it was time to go. I needed to leave that town, leave all of it behind, if I was ever going to feel like myself again. Looking back now, I realized that leaving was the first real step toward healing, and though peace would always feel just out of reach, I couldn't take it anymore. Those same sidewalks, those same faces, the same buildings that whispered old memories. My mother still spoke about the church like none of it ever happened, and my father, well, he lived in his own little world, never knowing the truth. Lisa had tried to help me as much as she could, but she had her own life to live, and I didn't want to be another burden on her shoulders. One day, I heard about a seamstress in the next town over who needed help, and something about that lit a spark in me. I packed up the few clothes I owned, took what little cash I'd saved from hemming skirts for the neighbors, and told my mother I was going to try my luck over there. She wasn't happy, said I was turning my back on the family, but I knew I had to go. When I arrived in that new town, I was nervous, scared, unsure of what I'd find. I rented a tiny room, bare concrete floor, an old iron bed, but it was mine. I started apprenticing with Miss Zilda, a seamstress in her 50s who didn't ask too many questions. She showed me how to cut fabric straight, how to thread the machine without breaking the needle, how to sew a clean hem. I liked working with my hands. It kept my mind busy, gave me a bit of peace. Soon enough, I was making a little money of my own. I started sewing dresses for myself and for the ladies in the neighborhood, selling dish towels at the weekend market. But the nightmares didn't go away. At night in that hard little bed, they came back. I'd see his face, feel his touch, hear his voice telling me it was all my fault. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling for hours trying to breathe. I prayed again, asking God to forgive me, thinking maybe I was still being punished, but he stayed silent. Now I know it was never my fault. He was the one who did wrong, but back then, the shame clung to me like a second skin. It took time, but slowly, I started to see that I needed help to climb out of that darkness. One afternoon, I was working on a dress when Miss Zilda caught me crying. She didn't pry, just asked softly what was going on. And something in me cracked. For the first time in years, I wanted to talk. I told her everything, voice shaking, every word like ripping out a piece of myself. I told her about Pastor James, about what he did, how my mother hadn't believed me, how I lived afraid for so long. She listened, didn't interrupt, her eyes full of tears. Then she hugged me and said I wasn't alone, that none of it was my fault, that I was strong for surviving. She told me about a support group in town, a circle of women who'd been through their own pain and helped each other heal. She encouraged me to go. I was scared, but I went. And in that room, I found women of all ages, each carrying stories like mine. They welcomed me like I was already family. I cried harder than I ever had, and they just sat with me, held my hands, told me I didn't have to carry it alone. One woman, Clara, gave me a little book filled with prayers and stories about healing. Another taught me how to breathe through the panic, slow and deep, when the memories came rushing in. Bit by bit, the weight started to lift. Those women helped me carry what had nearly crushed me. I kept sewing dresses, blouses, towels for the market. The money came in slowly, but it was steady, and eventually I moved into a better room. It even had a little window where I could see the sky. But the trauma still found me. Sometimes I see a man who looked just like him walking down the street, and I'd break into a cold sweat, heart racing, and run home like the ground was on fire. There were nights when I'd wake up screaming, and Miss Zilda, the woman who'd taken me in and loved me like her own, would come into my room and sit by my bed until I could breathe again. Looking back now, I see clearly. She and that little support group saved my life. Without them, I don't think I would have made it. By the time I turned 30, I had my own place, a tiny home with a sewing room tucked near the back. I never went back to my hometown. My folks visited once in a while, but I never told them the truth. I didn't have the strength to say it all again. Lisa, bless her heart, used to write me letters saying how much she missed me, and I'd write back, keeping it light, careful not to touch the past. That circle of women stayed close, and little by little, I began to share my story with others who had faced the same kind of darkness. It wasn't easy, but every day I made it through it felt like a small victory. Now, looking over my shoulder from where I am, I know leaving that town was the best decision I ever made. I walked away from the place that broke me and found a patch of earth where people offered kindness instead of shame. I learned to stitch together a new life using the same hands that he tried to stain. But even so, the peace I longed for never fully arrived. There's still an ache when I think back. There are still nights when the fear returns. But I stood up. I fought. I made it through. And it's that fight that keeps me telling this story. Today, at 60 years old, I look back and see a life marked by pain, yes, but also by courage. My name is Mary. After everything I endured, I pieced together what I could of my life. I live in a quiet little house in rural Tennessee with a modest sewing room that helps keep the bills paid. I make dresses for the neighborhood girls, dish towels for the weekend market, and even teach a few teens how to thread a needle, just the way Miss Zilda once taught me. But that peace I chased all those years, I know now it was never meant to be whole. Some wounds never close all the way. Pastor James died a long time ago. Word was it was cancer. I never saw him again after he left town. I never had the chance to face him, to ask him why he did what he did, why he used the name of God to destroy me. That question still sits heavy on my chest. I wish I could have looked him in the eye and told him he was no man of God, that he stole my childhood and left me carrying a shame that was never mine. But he's gone, and I'm still here, left with the memories that creep in on the darkest nights. My parents are both gone now, too. My mom died without ever knowing the truth. After she called me a liar that day, I could never bring myself to tell her again. She held on to her blind faith until the end, believing he was a holy man. I never said another word, and my dad, he never knew. Maybe that was for the best. We saw each other now and then before they passed, but things were never the same. Every time I looked at my mother, I felt that old emptiness, knowing she didn't believe me when I needed her most. I understand now that her faith trapped her, but at the time, it cut like a blade. Lisa, my childhood friend, is still in my life. She's married, has kids, and lives in a nearby town. We write letters or catch up when she visits. It was her strength that helped me speak out the first time, and I'll never forget that. Even with her friendship, even with the support of the women who stood by me, even with the work that gives my life rhythm, the past never really let me go. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still flinch when I walk by a church and hear those hymns echoing through the walls. I try to pray, but my faith never returns to what it once was. I've learned to live with the ache, to sew it into the fabric of my days like a crooked thread that doesn't quite disappear. Helping other women who've walked this same road gave me purpose. At our support group, I share my story to remind them it's possible to keep it going. Even after you've been knocked down so far, you can't see the light. But the truth is, I never really healed. What he did changed me forever. And what my mother didn't do, how she looked away, left a scar just as deep. Yes, I— but the peace I knew as a little girl singing hymns without fear, That version of me never came back. Now when I look down at the stitches I sew, at the young girls I teach to guide fabric beneath the needle, I realize I did the best I could with what I had left. I held my head high. I built a home, found a way to live, to keep going. But the emptiness is still there, and I think it always will be. If I, after all these years of carrying this pain, manage to move forward, then you can too. Whatever hurt you, whatever broke you, just know this. Life is hard, but we can be harder still, even if peace never fully comes. And if you've made it this far into my story, let me hear from you. Tell me where you're listening from. What corner of the country? What little town or big city? Leave a comment and let me know where my words found you. Maybe they'll find someone else who needs to hear this too.